Welcome back. Let's Get Physical Therapy is an educational podcast brought to you by MedStar Health and hosted by me, physical therapist Becca Schumer. I will be sharing the mic with tons of healthcare professionals with the goal of educating and inspiring fellow PTs and future PTs. We hope you find this both informative and inspirational, ultimately optimizing how we treat our patients and grow as professionals. Please enjoy today's episode. Today on the podcast, we have Harsh Takkar. He's from Silver Spring, Maryland, and wasn't always part of the disability community. Harsh is an avid advocate for the disability community since his own personal injury in 2006. Harsh, being the young victim of a violent incident, sustained a spinal cord injury, which partially left him paralyzed from the waist down. As a result, he understood from an earlier age the importance of self-advocacy and the necessity of a solid support system. Harsh currently serves as a community outreach manager at MedStar National Rehab Hospital. In addition, he's a team manager for the NRH Punishers wheelchair basketball team. In his current professional role, he coordinates programs that encompass complete wellness for those impacted by neurological disabilities and disorders and gaining insight into the needs of the community to best fit their needs. The adaptive sports and fitness programs are highly operated by volunteers. So to learn more about the program and volunteer opportunities, please visit the link in our podcast description for today's episode. Let's jump into it. Good morning, Harsh. How's it going?
Good, doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing well. Welcome to the podcast. I am excited to host you. I think I ran into you or about you via LinkedIn when you were at a conference, and I was like, I have to get him on to talk about adaptive sports. So I'm excited to host you today and see what we're going to get into.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I believe I was like at the Asia conference for spinal cord injury, and then ended up doing like a presentation on adaptive sports, and then was on a panel about like the benefits and what I have gained from adaptive sports as a whole.
Awesome. Well, we like to start our podcast or I like to hear your story. How did you get into your career, and then how did you get into adaptive sports?
They're kind of my career and adaptive sports are kind of like intertwined. I am a T12 spinal cord injury due to a gunshot wound that I sustained in 2005. So I'm an incomplete paraplegic. So that in itself, just my life led me to adaptive sports. I was an athlete prior to my injury, and then started getting to adaptive sports about 9 months to a year post injury, just because like that was like one piece of my life that felt like I didn't want to miss. So when I started getting into adaptive sports, started discovering all of the different components of sports and the benefits of it outside of the physical realm. And that led me to my career path. Went to college post injury, worked after college. I worked at the Wounded Warrior program at Fort Belvoir, basically doing some contracting work, getting the WTBs, which is the Wounded Transition Battalion, for those that come back injured, getting them to do some adaptive sports programming. And then I did some like volunteer work at the National Rehab Hospital as a peer mentor to assist people with spinal cord injuries getting back into different realms of life. And that led me to the current position that I'm in at MedStar National Rehab Hospital. I am currently the community outreach manager, coordinating a lot of our adaptive sports programs, as well as running a fitness program and, trying to deal with like the community reentry and integration component of life for people with varying physical disabilities. And that has kind of flourished and blossomed into its own realm of life at this point.
Yeah, that's so cool. And we're going to talk about all the sports that are available in this program. And I'd like to hear about working with other professionals, because I know as a personal trainer, you're not just in your own silo, you are connecting with other PTs and probably OTs and all of that to help the patients, move better and participate in these sports. So what does that kind of look like in your day to day?
Yeah, I have a unique role in my day to day, outside of like personal training for the fitness program that I coordinate. I also work with our like inpatient therapist in co-treats with them, and that will be like PT, OT to teach like real life skills to patients and people with spinal cord injuries. Within my perspective, obviously, being somebody that's been through the process, I've had my own learned experiences that kind of like feed into it. So whether that's teaching transfers and just like providing people an outlook of what what those things may look like a little bit past what their initial phases are. And also like even with occupational therapy, like understanding the full scope of life of how to get dressed and how to like do your day-to-day modalities in a more effective manner. At the same time, that team component of seeing a patient, I think is super beneficial even for the therapist to understand what a full scope of life may look like. They may have a condensed view of whatever setting that they're in, and so this provides hopefully an outlook for them to understand that like there are higher level skills and things. So it adds a multitude of benefits of working with a whole team of individuals.
Is this kind of program available in the States? Do other hospital systems have this, or is this unique to National Rehab Hospital?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, there are a few other rehab hospitals across the country, um, spinal cord specific ones that have similar programs. Again, I happen to be in a unique role where this is more of like a full time job that encompasses multiple different levels of it. There are other programs across the country that offer like more peer mentoring based services. And that may look similar in terms of like they go in, they show not only the therapist, but also the patients on how to like kind of do some of those day-to-day tasks. Um, and so I don't want to say it's like completely unique. There are other programs and other facilities that utilize people that with lived experiences to kind of teach some of those like real life applications.
And I know there's different levels of activities that patients can get involved in and people in the community can get involved in. So there's some competitive and then there's more recreational. What does that look like? What sports are available and how do people get into that?
Yeah, I think there are a ton of different sports and activities. Some of them can be competitive, other ones are more recreational based. At the National Rehab Hospital, we have wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, cycling, wheelchair. We have sled hockey, wheelchair rugby, rowing, the fitness program, and then we also have different activities within like the fitness and like recreation sport activities. So we have like bocce ball, we have adaptive or seated yoga. All of those different activities are fully encompassed of like individuals that fit the right criteria. And then so for people to understand the right criteria is essential in like directing them and guiding them to the right like sport. Sometimes from our setting in a rehab hospital, we just want to do a basic introduction to all of these different sports that may relate to the individual. Some of them can be open, like so, like for example, bocce ball is a super open like activity that can be done on a recreational level as well as on a competitive level. But it's very much open to so many more injuries and disabilities than something as specific as like wheelchair rugby, for example. That one is specifically for individuals that are more quadriplegics or quad amps. So like as you can imagine, some of those components will be very much more directed to the proper individual, and we want to make sure we are guiding the right people to the right activity. And as a part of our recreation therapy department, which is where all of these sports are kind of housed and run from, all of our recreation therapists are very well attuned with the right qualifications for different activities and different sports. And they do a lot of co-treats with not just like the patients themselves, but also for individuals themselves that are going through it so that they have a better understanding of like what they can participate in. So within a part of my role, like that's one thing of like education, but then the other thing of like actually trialing the of the activities that people may be interested in or opening their eyes to new opportunities.
Yeah, it's so amazing how many sports are available, and that makes me wonder, like, manpower. How do you keep these teams running? Like, who's coaching? Who's doing all these things? I know you're one person; you can't do all of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I am fortunate and lucky to have a whole team of our recreation therapy department. We also have a ton of different like therapists that are highly involved. We utilize volunteers a lot for all of our programs. Um, so how we do things at the National Rehab Hospital, like our recreation therapy therapists, how we do things at the National Rehab Hospital, our recreation therapists are primary like managers of these different sports that I mentioned. And then what we do for sport specific things is sometimes we will have coaches that have had experience, or we will train people that are in the realm of either adaptive sports or therapy or anything along those lines, and provide them like education and training for them to become like higher level coaches. Each of the national governing bodies of these different sports that I listed, they have like training modules for people that want to be coaches, for classifiers, different things along those lines. And so we utilize our own team internally as people that coordinate and manage the programs. And then there are some of our programs where we use like external people who are trained, who we provide the education to, that can serve as coaches or support staff.
As PTs, we love to help people keep moving and getting back to doing the sports that they love to do. And that makes me curious about what kind of injuries are you seeing when they're playing these sports?
Yeah, that's always an interesting question from a PT standpoint. So it's interesting because the criteria of the sport played for individuals in the different like activities or sports may vary. So like wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, wheelchair tennis are very heavy in like the spinal cord aspect and the amputee aspects. And so those would be like the initial injuries or diagnosis that people may need to have in order to qualify to play those sports. Now, when it comes to the actual activities and competitions and different things like that, there are different levels of injury. So, if you think about the scope of someone's life that starts playing a wheelchair sport or an adaptive sport, they're going to have an overuse of their shoulders. They're going to have more orthopedic based needs outside of their initial injury or their diagnosis. When I speak with other PTs, like we discuss like preservations of shoulders a lot. We discuss even like hand function and different components like that. We discuss like the components of like flexibility, whether that be at their hips or whether that's at their ankles, for them to even like utilize some of this equipment, because the equipment may be very specific to like how they need to be set up based on their level of function. So those are all different evaluating points for individuals. And then when it comes to the actual injuries, we haven't seen any like major injuries within our programs or even across the board. But obviously, again, like overuse of like same muscle groups or same like formats of body parts is where we see the most like injury based um or I guess you can say more of like the need to address and to make sure that people are preventing injuries is where we highly kind of consider the factors of people's like abilities. And then I mean, aging comes into a big factor. I mean, there are individuals that get injured at a young age or individuals that start participating at an older age. And then so making sure we know where they are and what their body can handle is a big facet of it. But as I mentioned, I think to answer your question, there are more like orthopedic based needs for individuals that play adaptive sports instead of like more of like the neurological needs that they may have, during their initial onset of their injury or their diagnosis.
And I remember when I was in PT school at GW, we actually went to NRH and we got to use the different wheelchairs and practice on them. What do those cost? I'm assuming that they're not cheap to do these things.
Yeah, no, they say being disabled is an expensive thing to be. Unfortunately, not only for sports equipment, but even for like day-to-day living, insurance doesn't always cover all components of like regular everyday use of wheelchairs or adaptive equipment. And so similarly, it's even more constricted when it comes to the aspect of sports. For example, a wheelchair for like wheelchair rugby or wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis can range anywhere between $3,000 and $7,000 to $8,000. A track chair for those that may have a track program is like on the higher end of that, anywhere between like 5,000 and 10,000. For somebody that's getting into like cycling, some of those cycles can range anywhere from like 3,000 on the lower end of like the recreational component to like anywhere close to 10,000 for those that are getting to like competitive marathon based or like long distance racing. And then, we specifically don't have some of like the track programs for amputees and things like that, but like some of those prosthetics can, also range on like the top end above like $5,000. So again, like this, it all ranges, and it is expensive to get involved in some of these sports. And so us as a program, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have equipment for individuals that are new to our programs to at least trial out. It may not be like the best size that fits, their exact needs, but we want to provide them something so they can have an idea of it. They get a chance to trial the equipment prior to like making that, that expensive commitment. Additionally, what we also like to do is we also like to educate individuals on grants and different assistance that is offered across the board. And some of these may be national programs, some of these may be like state specific or like city specific programs that they can take advantage of. And so we want to make sure to provide enough information for individuals that want to continue in a sport or an activity, how to get their own equipment. And so when someone applies for a grant, a lot of our recreation therapists write, it's not like a letter of necessity, but more of a reference letter of what they've done, their involvement in the sport or activity, and then make sure that like they have the adequate enough needs for specialized equipment that is just for them, because as PTs know, like one size does not fit all. And so we want to make sure people have the right equipment for what their needs are.
Yeah, and when someone is trying to get into adaptive sports, obviously there's been a huge life change. Like some injury has occurred that is now requiring them to adapt. And I'm curious. It seems like an obvious question, but I'd love to hear from you. What's the impact that this program has had on your patients?
Yeah, I believe that's a great question, because it's unique in terms of like the individuals. We all know that the benefits of like sport and activity and movement and exercise, like that there are overarching and over encompassing like benefits, right? So that's outside of the physical plane of benefits. Obviously, like exercise and sports, they add a huge benefit for people to be able to manage their body and understand different components of like what their bodies can handle. But some of the other benefits, and this is like also research driven, there are huge psychological benefits, there are huge social psychological benefits. And then there are like just like self-efficacy based benefits. To speak from my own experience, going to my first wheelchair basketball practice was the first time that I met people that were driving themselves, that had families, that had, they discussed like going to work, they discussed, owning their own businesses. And so that opened my eyes for to eliminate the stigmas that I had when I initially got injured for individuals with disabilities was that I learned that people with disabilities could do all of these different things that in the initial onset of my injury, I thought those some of those components of my life were kind of stripped away. And so within our program, we've noticed very similar benefits in our programs where people will participate in one sport or activity and then they'll be like, okay, like what else is out there? What else can I participate in? And then we have range of individuals. Some of our program is specific to youth. And so we get people introduced right away to a sport or activity at a younger age and then allow them to kind of filter whatever it is that they start getting involved in. Um, so we notice and we have very similar trends for individuals in terms of the benefits of adaptive sports. They get a sense of community, which is one of the biggest components of things that a lot of people initially going through their disability or their injury have a hard time with is the connection piece of, you know, where are other people like me, and then how do they like facilitate and live their lives. And on the same realm, like there are the same components of community that go for the families of those individuals. So it's not just the individual that's being impacted, it's also the family that's being impacted by seeing other family members and how they handle you know, the person in their life that's going through this challenge and this life-changing event. And so it builds this like natural dynamic support system for people. And it's not something where you have to like sit in a circle and talk about, you know, your problems, your issues that some of the benefits from like different support groups may come from, but it is a very natural, free flowing way for people to like build a sense of community, build a sense of self confidence, and understand that they can and they will, with some time and some effort, get to the points of like becoming independent and being able to travel and do a lot of these different things themselves.
I mean, there's so much carryover between sport and life, and just being able to access those activities and how it affects, you know, as you said, psychologically, your ability to be present in the rest of your life and your career and your relationships. So it's just amazing what you're doing down there. I think it's incredible. One question I
Yeah,
do
no,
have,
absolutely.
yeah, one question I do have is, I know you mentioned there's a GW student, DPT student that was helping out. If someone wants to volunteer or get involved, you know, our audience is mostly PTs, PT students, OTs. How can they get involved?
Yeah, we are always looking for volunteers. We host different tournaments during the year. So we're looking for like sport specific based volunteers. And again, we are not looking for volunteers that have like prior experience. We are more than happy to educate and to provide any sort of training for volunteers. Um, we have a we have a we have a website for our adaptive sports and fitness program. It's on medstarnrh.org. If you go to that website and then just search like adaptive sports, you'll come to a web page. It may be a link that we can even put on, you know, the description of the podcast. And what people can do is if you go to that, there is a volunteer section at the very top. We have a volunteer coordinator. We have a volunteer system where people can put in their availabilities. They can see what days and times we have certain programs operating on a more consistent and regular basis. And then we also have times where we're doing like one-off events where people can volunteer, can just come check out the different sports and activities. And this would allow, you know, for people that want to volunteer, not only get like the scope of, you know, what these sports and activities are, but also be able to understand what the level of assistance may be needed. Our programs, we work with a lot of PT students as a whole. So myself, our community rec therapists, our recreation therapist manager, we do a lot of different like education, outreach, and awareness based activities. And so what we'll do is we'll like get people right from those events and get them to sign up to become a volunteer. And again, like I said, they can designate what their availability is. They can see what programs actually need volunteers, and how to come check out and actually observe and be a part of our programs.
That's amazing. Harsh, while I have you on, is there anything else you want to share about the adaptive sports program? Any other gems that you want to share with us and how this program is so impactful?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially on like the PT, OT, like the therapy world. I believe in like acute care and in like the initial phases of rehab. Therapists have as I mentioned, a limited scope of life. So one thing I would always encourage is anyone that wants to understand where that patient or that person is going to be in their life, like go check out some of these sports, go check out some of these activities, because what it does is it provides you a full scope of a person's life outside of their denotion as a patient. We all know and understand that, like, no matter what happens in life, that people will, overcome it with the time given. And so, not to limit individuals and to make sure people are aware, like make yourself aware of like what 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 components of like driving may be a factor, like so when we're practicing different things like transfers or getting in and out of different equipment, what levels of assistance may be needed, where people can actually get to at the end, or as they're getting through their recovery process a little further. um, that's like one of the major components that I always want to share, especially with this certain group of individuals. I do a lot of community outreach based events and conversations with PT schools. And so one of the other things that I will always mention is like, if you're going into PT to make some money, I think you can pick a different route, just because there is so much more of this like human component to this occupation, that like we can't forget that you're actually dealing with like people, their emotions. They're in very some people can be in very fragile states as they're going through life-changing events. And so meeting the person where they are is amazing, and then also understanding where they're going to actually get to. So I believe in the scope of like rehab, or in the scope of therapy, a patient is only going to succeed as far as the therapist is willing to be open. Um, and so having that openness from the therapist end is going to be huge. A lot of times I mention even my own realm of like therapy. I had a new grad as a therapist when I first got injured on my outpatient end, and she had all these like great new ideas, and she was willing to try it and willing to like fail at it. And she would always premise it by saying like, hey, like this may not work, so like we're going to set like real expectations, and we're going to say that like even if it doesn't work, we're going to try it another way again. A lot of times, at least being a part of this world now, so I've been at the National Rehab Hospital in my role now for about 8 years, and a lot of times therapists will come to me and say like, hey, I feel like this person is like plateauing. What other avenues and aspects can we work on? And one of my biggest takeaways from that is like they may be plateauing from like a therapy standpoint, or from like a functional regain of like muscle movements or different things like that, but they're not plateauing as an individual. So as an individual, wellness and health and exercise should still be components of their life, just as they should be for everyone. And so not to take away from what therapists do and all of the things that they provide, but understanding that like you yourself as a PT, as an OT, as a clinician, owe it to yourself and owe it to the person to understand them as an individual, and not just within the scopes of what you're treating them for.
And you obviously have firsthand experience, but I can imagine when you initially get injured and your life is sort of kind of flipped upside down, and usually it's traumatic. And I know as an athlete myself, if I had the ability to play sport taken away that fast, I would need someone to instill hope in me. I would need that therapist to be on my side and encourage me and show me that these options exist, and that there's other ways that we can get the work done and get back to doing what you love to do. So I absolutely love what you're doing. It's incredible, and I really hope that this podcast reaches PT students, PTs who want to volunteer and get involved in this, because it's awesome what you're doing, Harsh.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the bigger components of this, even I hope like there are individuals with disabilities that, are interested in sports that get a chance to like listen to some of this stuff as well, because um, you know, again, like I mentioned, like meeting somebody where they are at, like so I've had people and patients that'll be like, no, I'm not ready for a sport or activity because they were an athlete. Sometimes the deterrent is the fact that it's so different or feels so different from how natural it may have felt to them prior to. Um, and so like making sure that you're plugging this option and availability to them, and then also being able to like reach out to them like, periodically or as time goes. And I know sometimes that may be difficult for clinicians, but pulling in people that have had lived experiences is a great avenue for them to like reach out to them, a year later, reach out to them, 6 months later, because sometimes they may not be ready at the very initial shock of it, but that doesn't mean that they won't get there. And sometimes they need that continual push or that continual even like reminder of like, hey, this exists still. I know you were like made aware of it, but you weren't ready for it at that time. So is this something you're interested in now? We've had people 5 years later come back to us and say, like, I remember you told me about, wheelchair basketball or any of these other activities. And I think I'm ready to like approach it now. And, that brings hope for the therapist. As we're talking about instilling hope within the patient, we also want to instill hope in the therapist of understanding, hey, like, your work did not go like completely overlooked, that like your plug-in that one day that you had this conversation held value to this other individual, at a place in their life where they were finally able to receive it.
Beautiful. Well said. Harsh, we like to end our podcast asking your favorite quote. What is a quote that moves you, drives you, inspires you?
One of my favorite quotes, and I've been using it a lot, is change the way you see things and you'll see things change.
Love it. That's a great one. Harsh, where can people find you? I will put the link in the description for the website, but if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so on that same link, as a coordinator of a couple of different programs, my email address is on there. My telephone number is in the contacts of of the wheelchair basketball section. So, just to throw it out there right now, my first name is Harsh, HARSH .V as in Victor THAKKAR at medstar.net is how you can directly email me. My phone number at work is 202-877-1859. You can contact me that way. And I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. If anyone wants to shoot me a message in different ways, they can feel free to do so as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I think it's super important for people to understand, the full scope of life for individuals that get into adaptive sports. So thank you for even making this a topic for the podcast.
You got it. Have a good day.
Thank you, too.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Get Physical Therapy podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram at MedStar Health PT. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so we can reach more listeners just like you. As always, we appreciate your time and hope you join us for our next episode.